Welcome to AI and Machine Learning Deep Dives. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating journey into the world of decision trees. Have you ever played that game, 20 Questions, where you try to guess something, maybe an object or a person, just by asking yes or no questions? You start broad, right? Like, is it alive? Then you narrow it down. Is it bigger than a bread box? Until, boom, you get the answer. Well, decision trees are surprisingly intuitive. They work in a very similar way, really, slicing through data to bring clarity. It's almost like a shortcut to understanding how really complex decisions can be broken down. Pretty neat, huh?
Precisely. Yeah, it's a great analogy. We'll be exploring how these pretty powerful machine learning tools really do mimic that human decision-making process, starting broad, asking those big questions first, and then getting more and more specific. And what's really fascinating, I think, is how they take what looks like data chaos, just numbers and categories all over the place, and somehow transform it into clear, actionable insights. They give you this visible, logical path to a prediction or a classification. It's a cool mix of like human intuition and computer power.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because we're talking about a core concept in machine learning, but it really is as straightforward as that game. Let me walk you through it. Imagine, just for a second, you're trying to guess your friend's favorite animal. Now, you wouldn't just jump straight in with, is it a cat? Right. I mean, that'd be super inefficient. If they say no, well, you haven't really learned much, have you? Instead, your gut feeling, your human instinct, tells you to start broader, something that knocks out a whole bunch of possibilities at once. Like, maybe, is it a mammal? Ask that first, and bang, you've just eliminated birds, fish, reptiles, insects, tons of stuff. That's smart thinking, really strategic.
And that's basically it. That's how a decision tree works in a nutshell. What's really interesting from a technical perspective, though, is that decision trees are a type of non-parametric supervised learning algorithm. No, I know. Those terms sound a bit heavy, maybe intimidating. But let me break it down. Non-parametric just means they're flexible. They don't make strict assumptions about, how your data is shaped or distributed. Imagine you don't need to guess if your data fits a nice straight line or some perfect curve. The tree just finds the patterns, however messy they are. Big advantage, that flexibility. And supervised learning, that just means they learn from data where we already know the right answers. Labeled data, so it learns from past examples. So they take this labeled data and organize it hierarchically. In a tree structure, like a branching flow chart you'd use for troubleshooting, each sort of junction point inside the tree, an internal node we call it, is like a test, a question based on a feature, like is it a mammal or is the color red? And these tests lead you down different branches, splitting the data into groups that get more and more similar. More homogeneous is the term. Think homogeneous as pure. You want groups where everything is the same type, until you finally reach the endpoints, the leaf nodes. That's where the final answer is, the classification or the predicted value. No more splitting there. So yeah, it really does resemble a flowchart or maybe one of those old choose your own adventure books. But it's all about making data-driven decisions, breaking down complexity with these conditional if-then-else kind of steps.
Okay, so what does this actually mean for you, listening in? Maybe you're prepping for a meeting, trying to get up to speed on this stuff, or maybe you're just curious. Well, it means you get a clear visual pathway to a decision. Unlike some other, maybe more complex algorithms that can feel like a bit of a black box, where you get an answer out, but you have no idea how it got there. With a decision tree, you can literally trace a logic, step by step. If this, then that, then okay, here's the answer.
Mm.
That transparency makes them incredibly easy to interpret and to explain, even to people who aren't data scientists. That's a massive advantage in the real world, right? Where understanding the why is often just as crucial as the what.
Exactly. It's all about demystifying that black box. You can see the reasoning. You can walk someone through it, a colleague, your boss, a client, maybe even a regulator. That kind of transparency is, it's becoming more and more important in AI and machine learning, especially as these systems get used in really critical areas.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And that brings us nicely to takeaway number one. Decision trees are hierarchical, flowchart-like structures that mimic human decision-making, using a series of questions to classify or predict outcomes from complex datasets, much like a game of 20 questions. All right, so now we've got a good handle on what they are. Let's dive a bit deeper into how they actually, think. How do they turn those questions into actual predictions? Let me set up another simple example. Imagine we're building a tree to predict if a fruit is an apple or an orange. Okay, and we give it some basic info. The fruit's color, maybe its size, its texture. That's the data it has to work with.
Right, and this brings up a really fundamental question, doesn't it? How does the algorithm choose those questions? Which one does it ask first? The big one.
Yeah.
And then what? It's not just random. It's a very systematic process. It starts right at the top, the root node we call it, looking at the entire data set. And from there, it recursively partitions the data.
Recursively partitions mean
Sorry. It just means it keeps splitting the data again and again into smaller and smaller groups, like zooming in, basically. And at each step, each split, it uses what's called a greedy search approach. Now, greedy sounds a bit negative maybe, but it just means that at every single decision point, every node, it looks for the single best split it can make right now. The one that gives the most immediate improvement in separating the data, reducing the most uncertainty. It's efficient, computationally, but it's called greedy because it only looks at the immediate gain. It doesn't look ahead to see if maybe a slightly worse split now could lead to an even better overall tree later on. It's focused on the here and now. And each split just narrows down the possibilities until it hits a final confident prediction. That's at the leaf nodes again.
exactly. Okay, so back to our fruit example. The tree might start at the root and ask, is the fruit round? That's its first big question. If the answer is yes, it goes down that branch. Next question might be, is it red or green? If it's red, maybe the tree is confident enough now to predict apple. That's a leaf node. But if it's green, maybe it needs more info. But then ask about texture. Is it smooth or rough? To finally figure out if it's a green apple or, I don't know, maybe a lime or something else. And this just keeps going. Each internal node is a test on an attribute: color, size, texture. Each branch shows the result of that test, yes, no, or maybe a range like size greater than 5 centimeters. And each leaf node, at the very end of a path, holds the final answer: apple or orange in our case, or sometimes a number if it's a different type of tree.
Yeah, and if you zoom out again, connect it to the bigger picture, this whole thing is built on that powerful divide and conquer strategy. You take a big complex problem, divide it into smaller, simpler problems, solve those, and combine the answers. That strategy, plus the greedy search for the best split at each step, that's really the core of how decision trees work. And the path, from the very top, the root node with all the data, all the way down to one specific leaf node, that path perfectly illustrates how the tree classifies or predicts for any single piece of data you feed it. Those internal nodes after the root, they're just doing more splitting, applying rules on specific features, mini decisions, refining things. And the leaf nodes, yeah, they're the endpoints, the final conclusion, the prediction is made, no more splitting. They represent those pure groups the tree has managed to isolate.
Right. It's like following a recipe or a set of instructions until you get the final dish. Okay. That brings us to takeaway number 2. Decision trees systematically predict outcomes by recursively splitting data at nodes based on features, mirroring a flowchart, until they reach a final prediction at a leaf node. Now, something you might not know is that decision trees actually come in 2 main flavors. It depends on what you're trying to predict. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Understanding this difference is really key if you want to use them effectively.
Indeed. Yeah, there are 2 main types you really need to know about, and which one you choose totally depends on your problem. So first up, we have classification trees. You use these when you're sorting things into distinct, separate categories or classes. The answer is a label, basically. Think about classifying species of animals, right? Is it a dog, a cat, a bird? Those are distinct classes. Or maybe detecting spam email. An email is either spam or not spam, clear categories. Or predicting customer churn, will a customer leave or stay? Again, distinct outcomes. So the output of a classification tree is always one of a finite set of labels. It answers the question, which group does this belong to?
Okay, classification trees for categories. Got it.
What's the other type?
The other type is regression trees.
Regression, okay.
Yeah, and these are what you use when you need to predict a continuous numerical value, not just a category. So for instance, if you wanted to estimate the market price of a house based on its feature size, location, number of bedrooms, whatever, the price isn't just cheap or expensive, right? It could be any value within a range. That's continuous. That's where a regression tree comes in. Other examples, maybe predicting stock prices, forecasting next quarter's sales figures, or even estimating, say, how many days a patient might need to recover after surgery. The key difference, as you can probably see, is the output. Classification trees give you those distinct class labels. Regression trees give you actual numbers, continuous values.
Exactly, and this distinction really matters. Think about it. Trying to predict someone's exact age using a classification tree, it wouldn't really work unless you had really broad age categories like young, middle-aged, senior. But if you needed their specific age, like 37, a classification tree isn't built for that. A regression tree handles that perfectly, predicting the actual number. Both types are super valuable, but yeah, your choice really depends on your data and what you're trying to predict. Interestingly, there's a very common algorithm called CART stands for classification and regression trees. It's popular because it's versatile enough to build both kinds of trees within one framework, sort of highlights how fundamental this tree structure is.
That makes sense. You need the right tool for the job. Which brings us to takeaway number 3. Decision trees come in 2 main types: classification trees, which categorize data into distinct classes, and regression trees, which predict continuous numerical values. Okay, let's pause for a quick vocabulary check, just make sure we're all grounded in the key concepts. We talked about root nodes, internal nodes, leaf nodes, but we touched on how the tree decides which question to ask at each point. That seemed pretty important. You mentioned things like information gain, entropy, and Gini impurity. Sounds a bit technical, maybe. These are kind of the mathematical engine driving the splits, right? The secret sauce.
That's a great way to put it. They are the secret sauce, the mathematical backbone. They're not just arbitrary rules. They are precisely how the tree identifies the best feature to split on at each node. The feature that does the best job of separating the data and leading towards those pure leaf nodes. Understanding these really helps you understand how the tree learns. Let me try to break them down simply. Okay, first, entropy. Think of entropy as a measure of impurity or disorder or uncertainty in the data at a specific node. Imagine that bag of mixed candies, again, chocolates, gummies, hard candies, all jumbled up. If you reach in blind, you have no idea what you'll get. Lots of uncertainty. That's high entropy. Now, if the bag only had chocolate bars, no uncertainty at all, you know exactly what you're getting. That's very low entropy. Zero entropy, actually, if it's perfectly pure. Decision trees want to reduce entropy with every split. They want to go from that mixed bag towards bags containing only one type of candy. Bring order out of chaos step by step. Okay, building directly on that idea is information gain. Information gain measures how much the entropy, the uncertainty, is reduced after you make a split based on a particular feature. Think back to 20 questions. Asking, is it an animal, usually gives you way more information, reduces your uncertainty more, than asking something less distinguishing early on, like, does it have 4 legs? Information gain calculates that reduction in uncertainty. The tree looks at all possible splits it could make and chooses the one with the highest information gain. Why? Because that split is doing the best job of creating purer subsets of data. It's the most informative question to ask at that point, getting the most bang for your buck from each split. And then there's Gini impurity, or the Gini index. It's similar to entropy in that it also measures disorder or impurity at a node. Let's use another analogy. Imagine sorting fruit into baskets. You want each basket to end up with only one type of fruit, right? Apples in one, oranges in another. Baskets with just one type of fruit are pure. They have low Gini impurity. A basket with a mix of apples, oranges, and bananas. That's impure, high Gini impurity. The tree's goal, using the Giannini criterion, is to make splits that result in baskets or nodes with the lowest possible Gini impurity, getting things sorted into pure groups quickly. Technically, the Gini index measures the probability of misclassifying a randomly chosen element if you labeled it randomly according to the distribution of labels in that node. A Giannini score of 0 means perfect purity. Everything in the node belongs to the same class.
Okay, those concepts, entropy, information gain, Giannini impurity, the tree decides how to split. That makes sense. But then the obvious question comes up, especially for people starting out. Which one is better, Giannini or entropy? Does it really matter much in practice?
That's an excellent, very practical question, and beta scientists do think about this. From a purely computational standpoint, entropy involves calculating logarithms, which is mathematically a bit more complex. It tends to be slightly slower to compute than the Gini index, which uses simpler multiplication and squaring. Now, in terms of results, is one definitively better? While sometimes, in some specific situations, using entropy might lead to slightly more balanced trees or marginally better accuracy, but honestly, the difference in predictive performance is often quite small, usually not significant enough to justify the extra computation time, especially if you're working with really large data sets where speed matters. So for many practical applications, Gini impurity is often the default choice. It's faster, generally provides very similar results, and is perfectly adequate. The resulting tree structure might look slightly different depending on which one you choose, but the final predictions are often remarkably close. So Gini is often favored for efficiency. That said, sometimes those subtle differences in structure can lead to different interpretations or insights, so it's not always just about computation. But generally, Gini is a solid, fast default.
Okay, good to know. So efficiency often points towards Giannini, even if the results are usually pretty similar. Right, that brings us to takeaway number 4. Decision trees use mathematical criteria like entropy, measuring disorder, information gain, reduction in disorder after a split, and Giannini impurity, probability of misclassification, to determine the most effective ways to split data and achieve pure predictable groups. So we've covered quite a bit about how they work. Now, why are decision trees so popular? I mean, why do we hear about them so much in machine learning circles? What really makes them stand out from all the other algorithms out there? Why should you, our listener, really pay attention to them?
Yeah, there are some really compelling reasons why they're a staple in the toolkit. Several key advantages. First, and arguably the biggest one, is their interpretability and visualization. We touched on this, but it's worth emphasizing. This is huge. Unlike many complex models that act like black boxes, decision trees are transparent. You can literally follow the path from the root to a leaf and see exactly how a specific decision was reached. It mirrors human logic. If this condition is met, go here. If that condition is met, go there. This makes them incredibly easy to understand, not just for data scientists, but for anyone. You can explain the reasoning to managers, clients, stakeholders, even regulators. Being able to visually represent the decision process as a flowchart is incredibly powerful for communication and building trust, especially now with regulations demanding more explainable AI in areas like finance and healthcare. Second big advantage, they're great at handling diverse data types. Decision trees can naturally work with both numerical data like age, income, and categorical data like gender, city, product type, without needing a ton of preprocessing. Many other algorithms need you to convert everything into numbers first, often using complex techniques like one-hot encoding. Decision trees just handle it, which is a huge time saver and simplifies the workflow. Plus, they're relatively robust to missing values in the data, and they aren't overly sensitive to outliers, those extreme data points that can throw off other models. Then there's automatic feature selection. This is pretty cool. As the tree is being built, remember how it chooses the best split at each node using criteria like information gain or progeny impurity? Well, in doing so, it's automatically figuring out which features are the most important for making predictions. Features that provide the best splits get used higher up in the tree. Features that aren't very informative might not get used at all. So the tree essentially performs feature selection for you as part of the training process. You don't necessarily need to figure out the most important variables beforehand, the tree highlights them. And finally, they are quite good at capturing nonlinear relationships. Real-world data rarely follows simple straight lines, right? Relationships are often much more complex. Decision trees work by splitting the data space into regions or boxes. This allows them to model these complex, nonlinear patterns that simpler linear models would completely miss. They can find intricate interactions between features.
Wow, okay. So they're easy to understand, handle messy data well, pick out important features automatically, and deal with complex relationships. It really does sound like a Swiss Army knife for tackling data problems. I remember working on a project once. The data was, well, it was a mess. Numbers, categories, missing bits. Trying to feed that into some algorithms would have been a nightmare of cleaning and prep. But the decision tree just kind of took it in stride. It felt almost magical how it found structure and gave us insights we could actually understand and explain. Makes them super practical, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That versatility and transparency make them a fantastic foundational tool. Great for getting quick insights and building understandable models, even when the data isn't perfect.
Right. That brings us to takeaway number 5. Decision trees are highly valued for their ease of interpretation, ability to handle diverse data types without extensive preparation, and their inherent capacity for automatic feature selection, making complex decision processes clear and visual. Okay, but we know no tool is perfect, right? Decision trees sound amazing, but they must have some downsides, some quirks or limitations we need to be careful about. What are the main challenges or pitfalls we should be aware of when we're using them? Understanding the weaknesses is just as important as knowing the strengths.
That's a crucial point. Every algorithm has trade-offs. And yes, decision trees have some well-known limitations. Probably the most significant drawback is their tendency to overfit the training data, especially if you let the tree grow very deep and complex. Overfitting is like, imagine you're studying for a test, but instead of learning the general concepts, you just memorize the exact answers to the practice questions. You might ace the practice test, but when you see new questions on the real exam, even slightly different ones, you're lost. An overfit decision tree does the same thing. It learns the training data, including all its noise and specific quirks, too perfectly. Then, when it sees new unseen data, it doesn't generalize well and makes poor predictions. Another related issue is their sensitivity to small changes in the data. Sometimes, even minor variations in the training data can lead to a completely different tree structure being generated. One small change might cause a different feature to be chosen for the first split, and the whole tree cascades differently from there. This instability means they can be high variance estimators. Their predictions can swing quite a bit based on the specific training data they saw. They can also struggle with imbalanced data sets. Think about fraud detection again. You might have millions of normal transactions and only a tiny fraction of fraudulent ones. A standard decision tree might just learn to predict not fraud all the time because that's usually correct. It can become biased towards the majority class and miss the rare but important minority class because it hasn't seen enough examples to learn its patterns properly. And finally, while they're conceptually simple, actually training them, especially very large ones, can be computationally costly. That greedy search at each node involves evaluating potentially many features and many split points for each feature to find the best one. Repeating that recursively for a huge data set can take significant time and resources compared to some simpler algorithms.
Okay, so overfitting, sensitivity to data, issues with imbalanced data, and potentially high training costs. Those are definitely things to watch out for. So how do we deal with these? How do we take our potentially wobbly decision tree sapling and make it into a strong, reliable oak? What are the standard techniques practitioners use to mitigate these problems?
Great question. Because there are well-established techniques to address these very issues, making decision trees much more robust in practice. First off, the most common technique to combat overfitting is pruning. Pruning is basically just reducing the size of the tree, cutting off branches that aren't really adding much value or might just be mottling noise. There are two main ways to do it: pre-pruning or early stopping. Here, you set rules before you even start growing the tree to stop it from getting too complex. You might say, don't let the tree grow deeper than 5 levels, or don't split a node if it has fewer than 20 data points. This stops the tree before it overfits. Simple and fast. Post-pruning. With this approach, you first let the tree grow fully, potentially overfitting. Then you go back and trim branches. You look at branches or nodes that don't significantly improve the tree's performance on a separate validation dataset, data the tree didn't train on, and you snip them off. This can sometimes lead to better results than pre-pruning because you see the full structure first, but it takes more computation because you grow the full tree initially. Next up, and incredibly powerful, are ensemble methods. This is where you don't rely on just one decision tree. Instead, you combine the predictions from multiple trees. This almost always leads to better performance, reduces that variance problem, and combats overfitting very effectively. This is often where decision trees really shine in modern machine learning. Bagging, which stands for bootstrap aggregating. The idea here is to train many decision trees independently. Each tree gets trained on a slightly different random sample of the original data, drawn with replacement, meaning some data points get picked multiple times, some not at all for each tree. Then, you average the predictions of all the trees for regression or take a majority vote for classification. The famous random forest algorithm is a prime example of bagging. It builds lots of trees this way, often adding extra randomness by only considering a subset of features at each split, and it's known for being very robust and accurate. Boosting. Unlike bagging, where trees are built independently, boosting builds trees sequentially. Each new tree focuses on correcting the mistakes made by the trees that came before it. It pays more attention to the data points that were previously misclassified. This iterative process gradually builds a very strong predictor. Algorithms like AdaBoost, gradient boosting, XGBoost, LightGBM, these are all powerful boosting methods that often achieve state-of-the-art results. Beyond pruning and ensembles, hyperparameter tuning is also vital. This means finding the best settings for your decision tree model, things like the maximum depth if pre-pruning, the minimum samples needed to split, the criterion to use, IGNI or entropy. These aren't learned from data, you set them beforehand. You typically use techniques like grid search, trying all combinations from a list you provide, or random search, trying random combinations, to systematically test different settings and find the ones that give the best performance on your validation data. And never underestimate good data preparation. Careful feature selection, getting rid of irrelevant or redundant features, and solid pre-processing are key. For those imbalanced datasets we mentioned, techniques like oversampling the rare class or undersampling the common class before training can help the tree learn better. Cleaning inconsistent or noisy data also makes a big difference. Also, absolutely critical, model validation. Don't just measure performance on the data you trained on that can be misleading due to overfitting. Always use techniques like cross-validation. This involves splitting your data into multiple parts, training on some, testing on others, and rotating to get a reliable estimate of how well your model will actually perform on new, unseen data. This ensures it generalizes well. And finally, two often overlooked points: domain knowledge and regular updates. Talking to experts in the field your data comes from can give you invaluable insights. They can help you choose better features, understand weird patterns, interpret the tree's logic correctly, and avoid making silly mistakes a purely data-driven approach might make. And remember, the world changes. Data patterns drift over time. A model trained last year might not be accurate today. Regularly retraining and updating your decision tree with fresh data and insights is crucial to keep it relevant and effective.
Wow. Okay. So there's a whole suite of techniques: pruning, ensembles like random forests and boosting, tuning parameters, careful data prep, validation, domain knowledge, and keeping things updated. That's quite a toolbox for making decision trees truly robust. That brings us to takeaway number 6. While prone to overfitting, sensitivity to data changes, and potential bias with imbalanced data sets, decision trees can be significantly enhanced, and their drawbacks mitigated through techniques like pruning, ensemble methods, bagging, boosting, hyperparameter tuning, careful data preparation, and continuous validation. All right, we've got the theory down, the pros, the cons, how to make them better, but where do we actually see these things in action? It's one thing to understand the mechanics, but what are some concrete, real-world examples where decision trees are making a real difference? Where do they shine?
Oh, they're incredibly versatile. You find them used all over the place, across tons of industries, helping to make sense of complex situations. Take healthcare, for example. Doctors might use decision tree logic, perhaps embedded in software to help with diagnosis. You input a patient's symptoms, fever, cough, lab results, patient history. The system follows a tree structure, asking a series of questions, essentially, to arrive at a likely diagnosis or maybe suggest which further tests are needed. It helps standardize diagnostic processes and can act as a useful aid for clinicians. Then there's finance. Banks and lenders use them heavily for things like credit scoring and risk assessment. When you apply for a loan or a credit card, a decision tree model might analyze your income, credit history, debt levels, employment stability, and so on.
Oh.
Based on traversing the tree, it predicts your likelihood of repaying the loan, helping the bank make a fair and consistent decision. Businesses also use them for strategic planning, mapping out potential outcomes and risks for different investment or pricing decisions. Marketing teams love them for customer segmentation. They use trees to divide customers into groups based on demographics, purchasing behavior, browsing history, engagement levels, you name it. Are they a high-value customer? Are they likely to churn? Are they a new prospect? Knowing this allows companies to tailor marketing messages, offers, and retention efforts much more effectively. Much better than a one-size-fits-all approach. Fraud detection is another huge area. Financial institutions rely heavily on decision trees, often within ensembles, to analyze transaction patterns in real time. Is this transaction happening from an unusual location? Is the amount much larger than normal for this customer? Is the time of day suspicious? The tree asks these questions to flag potentially fraudulent activity instantly, protecting both the institution and the customer. In manufacturing, they're used for quality control. A tree might predict the likelihood of a product defect based on sensor readings from the production line, the batch of raw materials used, maybe even the ambient temperature during manufacturing. This allows companies to spot potential problems early, adjust processes, and reduce waste or costly recalls. And even when you're browsing online, say on an e-commerce site like Amazon, or watching something on Netflix, decision trees are often part of the engine behind the recommendation systems. They analyze your past behavior, what you've bought, watched, clicked on, rated, and maybe the behavior of similar users to predict what other products or movies you might like. Makes the experience much more personalized and engaging.
It's really striking how broad the applications are, isn't it? It really is about simplifying complexity everywhere. From a doctor figuring out a diagnosis to a bank deciding on a loan to Netflix guessing your next binge watch. It's this powerful yet understandable tool for making data-driven decisions that are both effective and transparent, turning messy data into clear actions.
Absolutely. Their intuitive structure and ability to handle various data types make them applicable almost anywhere you need systematic, explainable decision-making based on evidence.
Fantastic. That brings us to our final takeaway for the main content. Takeaway number 7. Decision trees are broadly applied across industries, including healthcare, finance, marketing, and e-commerce, to simplify complex decision-making, from diagnosing diseases and assessing loan risk to segmenting customers and detecting fraud. Well, we have certainly covered a lot of ground today on decision trees, really peeled back the layers on how these surprisingly intuitive machine learning tools actually work. It's been a great deep dive.
Indeed, it has. We went right from the basic idea, that 20 questions analogy, dove into their inner workings, the different types, demystified that key terminology like entropy and tyranny. We also looked at their big advantages like interpretability, but also, frankly, discussed their limitations like overfitting, and most importantly, explored how to overcome those limitations with techniques like pruning and those powerful ensemble methods.
Absolutely. So let's do a quick recap of all our key takeaways, just to lock everything in. Takeaway number 1. Decision trees are hierarchical, flowchart-like structures that mimic human decision-making, using a series of questions to classify or predict outcomes from complex data sets, much like a game of 20 questions. Takeaway number 2. Decision trees systematically predict outcomes by recursively splitting data at nodes based on features, mirroring a flowchart until they reach a final prediction at a leaf node. Takeaway number 3. Decision trees come in two main types: classification trees, which categorize data into distinct classes, and regression trees, which predict continuous numerical values. Takeaway number 4. Decision trees use mathematical criteria like entropy, measuring disorder, information gain, reduction in disorder after a split, and Gini impurity, probability of misclassification, to determine the most effective ways to split data and achieve pure, predictable groups. Takeaway number 5. Decision trees are highly valued for their ease of interpretation, ability to handle diverse data types without extensive preparation, and their inherent capacity for automatic feature selection, making complex decision processes clear and visual. Takeaway number 6. While prone to overfitting, sensitivity to data changes, and potential bias with imbalanced datasets, decision trees can be significantly enhanced and their drawbacks mitigated through techniques like pruning, ensemble methods, bagging, boosting, hyperparameter tuning, careful data preparation, and continuous validation. And takeaway number 7. Decision trees are broadly applied across industries, including healthcare, finance, marketing, and e-commerce, to simplify complex decision-making, from diagnosing diseases and assessing loan risk to segmenting customers and detecting fraud.
And maybe a final thought. The next time you encounter a seemingly complex algorithm or AI concept, try to remember this. Often, even sophisticated ideas can be made intuitive if you can relate them back to something familiar, like a game or a simple process. Breaking it down really helps.
That's great advice. So don't be intimidated by the jargon out there. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and most importantly, try to have fun with the learning process. You can definitely get a handle on this stuff. That's all for now, folks. Please like, share, and subscribe for more like this.